The letter trembled in Wilhelmina Edwards' hands as she stood on the train platform in Cheyenne, Wyoming, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air of 1883, wondering if the man who had written such kind words would take one look at her stuttering mouth and send her straight back to Pennsylvania. She had told him in her letters about her impediment, about how words caught in her throat like stones in a stream. But letters were one thing, and reality was quite another, and she knew from bitter experience that patience was a rare commodity when it came to a woman who could not speak properly. The train had deposited her here, with instructions to catch the smaller line to Medicine Bow, a cattle town nestled in the southern part of the territory, where a cowboy named Owen Vance had promised her a home, a future, and something she had stopped believing in years ago: safety. Her father had been a drunk with fists like hammers and a voice that could shake the walls of their cramped Philadelphia tenement. He had beaten the easy speech right out of her by the time she was 7 years old, making her so afraid to open her mouth that the words themselves seemed to fear coming out. When he died last winter, frozen in an alley behind a tavern, Wilhelmina had felt nothing but relief, but the damage was already done. Her stutter had become part of her, as permanent as the small scar above her left eyebrow, where his ring had caught her. She was 22 years old and had never been courted, never been kissed, never been looked at with anything other than pity or impatience by any man in Philadelphia. The mail order bride agency had seemed like her only chance at a different life. Owen Vance's letters had been simple but genuine. He wrote about his ranch 5 miles outside Medicine Bow, about the horses he bred and trained, about the big sky and the way the mountains looked at sunset. He had been honest about wanting a wife for practical reasons, someone to share the work and the life, but his words had held a warmth that made her dare to hope. He had not minded her stutter, he wrote, because he had always been more comfortable with silence anyway. That single sentence had made her cry. The train to Medicine Bow was smaller and more crowded than the one from Pennsylvania. Wilhelmina found a seat near the back and pressed her face to the window, watching the landscape change from the busy streets of Cheyenne to the wide open grasslands that seemed to stretch forever. The other passengers paid her little attention, which suited her fine. She clutched her carpet bag on her lap and tried not to think about what would happen when she finally met Owen face to face. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon when the train pulled into Medicine Bow. The town was smaller than she had imagined, just a main street with wooden buildings on either side, and the massive Union Pacific roundhouse dominating the north end. Cowboys and railroad workers moved along the boardwalks, and the smell of livestock and coal smoke hung in the air. Wilhelmina stepped onto the platform with her bag and looked around, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst right through her dress. She spotted him immediately. He was the only man standing still in the bustle of the platform, a tall figure in a worn brown hat and a canvas coat, his eyes scanning the disembarking passengers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. When his gaze landed on her, something shifted in his expression, a softening that she had not expected. He started toward her with long, easy strides, and she noticed he walked with a slight limp, favoring his right leg. "Miss Edwards?" His voice was deep and quiet, barely audible above the noise of the train yard. Wilhelmina nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. She tried to speak, to say yes or hello or anything at all, but the words stuck in her throat. Yes, she finally managed, her face flushing hot with embarrassment. I am Wilhelmina. Owen Vance did not flinch, did not look away, did not let impatience cross his face. Instead, he simply nodded and reached for her bag. "I am glad you made it safe," he said. "It is a long journey. You must be tired." The relief that flooded through her was so intense she felt dizzy. She nodded again, not trusting herself to speak. "My wagon is just over there," Owen continued, gesturing toward the street. "We will get you settled at the ranch. It is about an hour's ride, but the weather is holding, so it should be pleasant enough." He led her to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses, both dark bays with kind eyes. Owen helped her up onto the bench seat with a gentleness that surprised her, his hand steady under her elbow. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to set the horses moving. They rolled out of town, heading south, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. For the first 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. Wilhelmina kept stealing glances at the man beside her. Owen was perhaps 30 years old, with a weathered face that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and reached past his collar. His hands on the reins were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard for a living. There was something contained about him, a quietness that went deeper than just not talking. He seemed comfortable with the silence in a way that made her feel less anxious about her own inability to fill it. "That is Elk Mountain," Owen said eventually, pointing to a peak rising in the distance, "and those are the Medicine Bow Mountains to the west. The ranch sits in between, good grazing land with a creek that runs year-round." Wilhelmina nodded, drinking in the landscape. She had never seen so much open space, so much sky. In Philadelphia, the buildings had pressed in from all sides, making her feel trapped. Here she could see for miles in every direction. It is BB beautiful," she managed, the words coming out in fits and starts. Owen glanced at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she could not quite name. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "It is," he agreed. "I came here 5 years ago from Texas. Got tired of the heat and the crowds. Wyoming suits me better." She wanted to ask him questions, to know more about him, but forming the words felt like climbing a mountain. Instead, she stayed quiet and watched the land roll by. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon. It was modest but well kept, a small house made of logs with a stone chimney, a barn that looked newer than the house, several corrals with horses moving in them like dark shadows, and a scattering of outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows. "My hand Caleb got a fire going and some food ready," Owen explained as he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "He lives in the bunkhouse, but he helps with the cooking when needed. He is a good man, quiet like me." Owen helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag to the door. The inside of the house was simple but clean. One main room with a kitchen area, a table with 4 chairs, a fireplace with 2 rocking chairs in front of it, and 2 doors leading off to what must be bedrooms. The floors were wood, scrubbed clean, and colorful rag rugs were scattered about. It smelled like coffee and wood smoke and something cooking. "The room on the left is yours," Owen said, setting her bag down. "I am in the one on the right. I want you to feel comfortable here, Miss Edwards. We can take our time getting to know each other before we make anything official. Reverend Patterson in town can marry us whenever you are ready, but there is no rush." The kindness in his words made her eyes sting with tears. She had expected to be married immediately, to have no choice in the matter. The fact that he was giving her time, giving her space, was more than she had dared to hope for. "The thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. Owen nodded. "I will let you get settled. There is stew on the stove if you are hungry, and the washroom is through that door there. Make yourself at home." He left her then, stepping back outside to tend to the wagon and horses. Wilhelmina stood in the middle of the room, her bag at her feet, and felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. That first week passed in a careful dance of 2 people learning to exist in the same space. Owen rose before dawn to work with the horses, and Wilhelmina quickly fell into the rhythm of keeping the house and cooking the meals. She had learned to cook from her mother, who had died when Wilhelmina was 15, leaving her alone with her father and his rage. Cooking had always been a comfort, something she could do with her hands while her mouth stayed silent. Owen ate her food with genuine appreciation, always thanking her in his quiet way. He never pushed her to talk, never showed frustration when she struggled with words. Sometimes they ate entire meals in comfortable silence. Other times, he would tell her about his day, about which horses he was training, and what he hoped to accomplish, and she would listen with her whole attention, grateful that he did not seem to expect a response. Caleb, the ranch hand, was a grizzled man in his 50s with a limp more pronounced than Owen's. He had been a buffalo hunter before the herds disappeared, and he had a wealth of stories about the old days. He treated Wilhelmina with respectful courtesy, tipping his hat whenever he saw her and complimenting her cooking. Like Owen, he never seemed bothered by her stutter. On the 8th day, as Wilhelmina was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, Owen approached her with something in his hands. It was a book, the leather cover worn soft with age. "I thought you might like this," he said, holding it out. "It is a collection of poems by Walt Whitman. Reading helped me when I was having hard times. Thought it might do the same for you." Wilhelmina took the book carefully, running her fingers over the cover. She looked up at Owen and saw genuine care in his eyes. "The thank you," she said, and for once the words came out almost smoothly. "You are welcome," Owen replied. Then after a moment's hesitation, he added, "I want to tell you something, Miss Edwards, about why I understand." She waited, the book pressed against her chest. "I was in the war," Owen said, his voice low. "I was just a boy, barely 16, but I lied about my age and joined up. I saw things that nobody should see, did things that still wake me up at night. When I came home, I could not talk about it. Every time I tried, the words would choke me. My own father called me a coward because I could not speak of it. I left Texas because I could not stand the way people looked at me, waiting for me to explain myself when I had no explanations to give." Wilhelmina felt her throat tighten with emotion. She wanted to tell him that she understood, that she knew what it was like to be silenced by trauma, but the words tangled up inside her. Owen seemed to sense her struggle. "You do not have to say anything," he said gently. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what it is like when words fail you. And I want you to know that you are safe here. Nobody will ever hurt you again, not while I am alive." The tears came then, hot and fast, sliding down her cheeks before she could stop them. Owen stood awkwardly for a moment, then slowly, carefully, he reached out and touched her shoulder, just a light pressure that offered comfort without demanding anything in return. "The thank you," Wilhelmina managed through her tears. "Fef for understanding. Always," Owen said simply. That night, Wilhelmina sat in one of the rocking chairs by the fire and read the Whitman poems while Owen sat in the other chair, mending a bridle. The domesticity of the scene made her heart ache in a way that was both painful and sweet. She had never imagined she could have something like this, something so simple and peaceful. As October gave way to November, the weather turned colder. Snow dusted the mountains, and frost covered the ground most mornings. Wilhelmina found herself settling into the ranch life, more than she had thought possible. She tended a small vegetable garden that Owen had built for her near the house, preserved the last of the autumn harvest, and even began helping with some of the easier ranch chores. The horses fascinated her. Owen bred and trained them, selling them to ranchers and the army. He had a gift for working with difficult animals, the ones that others had given up on. Wilhelmina would watch from the corral fence as he worked with a skittish mare or a stubborn gelding, his movements patient and deliberate, his voice a low, soothing murmur. One afternoon, as she watched him work with a young paint horse that shied at everything, Owen called out to her, "Would you like to come in and meet her?" Wilhelmina's eyes widened. She had never been this close to a horse before. But something in Owen's expression gave her courage, so she climbed through the fence rails and walked slowly toward him. "This is Daisy," Owen said, keeping one hand on the mare's halter. "She is scared of her own shadow, but she has a good heart. Just let her smell you. Let her know you are not a threat." Wilhelmina extended her hand carefully, and the mare snuffled at it with soft nostrils. The horse's breath was warm against her palm, and up close, Wilhelmina could see the liquid depths of her large, dark eyes. There was intelligence there, and fear, and something that looked like hope. "Shh, she is be beautiful," Wilhelmina whispered. She is, Owen agreed, and she is getting better every day. Just needed someone to be patient with her. Wilhelmina understood then that he was not just talking about the horse. She looked at Owen and found him watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest tight. You are very patient, she said, forcing the words out. So are you, Owen replied. It takes courage to keep trying, even when things are hard. They stood there together with the horse between them, and Wilhelmina felt something shift inside her. She was falling in love with this quiet cowboy who understood silence and fear and the slow work of healing. That evening, as they sat at dinner, Wilhelmina made a decision. She set down her fork and looked directly at Owen. I wanted to tell you something, she said, her heart racing. Owen set down his own fork and gave her his full attention, his eyes patient and kind. I am listening, he said. She took a deep breath and began the story she had never told anyone. The words came out in fragments, broken and halting, but Owen never rushed her, never finished her sentences, never let his expression show anything but compassionate attention. She told him about her father, about the beatings and the fear, and the way her voice had simply stopped working properly. She told him about her mother's death and the lonely years that followed, about the relief she felt when her father died, and the guilt that came with that relief. She told him about the desperate hope that had made her answer his advertisement for a mail-order bride. By the time she finished, darkness had fallen outside, and the fire had burned down to embers. Owen's face was grave, his jaw tight with suppressed anger at the man who had hurt her. I am sorry you went through that, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not by someone who should have protected them. It made me be broken, Wilhelmina said, the words painful to speak. No, Owen said firmly, leaning forward. It made you strong. You survived and you kept going, and you had the courage to come all the way out here for a chance at something better. That is not broken, Miss Edwards. That is brave. The tears came again, but this time they felt cleansing, like a storm washing away old dirt. Owen stood and came around the table, and this time when he touched her shoulder, she turned into him, letting herself be held for the first time in longer than she could remember. His arms were solid around her, and she could hear his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. You are safe now, he murmured into her hair. I promise you, you are safe. That night marked a turning point. Over the following weeks, they grew closer in small, careful increments. Owen taught her to ride on the gentlest of his horses, an old gelding named Copper, who would not startle at anything. They rode together through the snowy landscape, and Wilhelmina discovered a freedom in movement that she had never experienced before. She also found that her stutter eased somewhat when she was relaxed and felt safe. With Owen, the words came more easily, though they still caught sometimes. He never minded, never showed impatience, and gradually she stopped apologizing for it. In mid-November, as the first real snow of the season began to fall, Owen asked her a question as they sat by the fire after dinner. Wilhelmina, he said, using her full name, which he rarely did. I know we said we would take our time, but I need you to know something. I have come to care for you deeply. These past weeks with you here have been the happiest I have had in years. I would be honored if you would consent to be my wife, not just in name, but in truth. Wilhelmina's heart soared. She looked at this good, patient man who had given her back her sense of safety, who had never once made her feel less than whole, and she knew her answer with complete certainty. Yes, she said, and the word came out clear and strong. I was want to marry you, Owen. I have come to love you. The smile that spread across Owen's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He reached for her hand, and she gave it to him gladly. He raised it to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture of such old-fashioned courtliness that it made her blush. Then we will go to town tomorrow and speak to Reverend Patterson, Owen said. if the weather holds. The weather did hold, and the next day they rode into Medicine Bow together in the wagon, sitting close on the bench seat. The town was busier than it had been when Wilhelmina arrived, with ranchers coming in for supplies before the winter truly set in. Owen kept a protective hand on her elbow as they walked to the white church at the end of Main Street. Reverend Patterson was a kindly man with white hair and spectacles that kept sliding down his nose. He agreed to marry them the following Sunday, giving them time to arrange for witnesses and to have the banns posted, though the latter was more tradition than necessity in Wyoming territory. As they left the church, Owen suggested they walk down to the general store. "We should get you a ring," he said, "and maybe some fabric if you want to make a new dress for the wedding." The general store was a treasure trove of goods: food staples, tools, fabrics, ribbons, and a glass case near the front containing jewelry. The proprietor, a woman named Mrs. Kaufman, greeted them warmly. She had kind eyes and seemed genuinely pleased when Owen explained they were looking for a wedding ring. "Oh, how wonderful!" Mrs. Kaufman exclaimed. "Let me show you what we have." The selection was small, but lovely. Wilhelmina's eye was drawn to a simple gold band with a tiny design engraved around it. When she pointed to it, unable to form the words to ask, Owen understood immediately. "That one," he told Mrs. Kaufman. "May I see it?" The ring fit Wilhelmina's finger perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She stared at the way the gold caught the light, and felt tears prick her eyes again. It is perfect," she managed. "We will take it," Owen told Mrs. Kaufman. While he paid for the ring, Wilhelmina wandered over to the fabric section. There was a beautiful deep blue wool that caught her eye, the color of the sky just after sunset. Owen appeared at her shoulder and nodded approvingly. "That would look beautiful on you," he said. "Get enough for a dress and a coat, too. Winter here gets cold." By the time they left the store, laden with packages, Wilhelmina felt like she was living in a dream. Owen helped her back into the wagon, and as they rode out of town, she leaned against his shoulder, feeling his warmth through their coats. The next few days were a flurry of preparation. Wilhelmina worked on her dress in the evenings, while Owen tended to the ranch chores. Caleb caught wind of the upcoming wedding and took it upon himself to organize what he called a proper celebration. He rode into town and spread the word, and soon it seemed like half the county planned to attend. "I hope you do not mind," Owen said when he heard. "Folks around here do not get many chances to celebrate, and they are good people. But if it is too much, I can tell Caleb to keep it small." Wilhelmina surprised herself by shaking her head. "And no, it is fine," she said. "You would like to meet our inn neighbors." The Sunday of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that matched Wilhelmina's new dress. She woke early and took special care with her appearance, brushing her long brown hair until it shone and pinning it up in a style her mother had taught her years ago. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her waist and falling in graceful folds to the floor. She had even managed to make a matching bonnet. When she emerged from her room, Owen was waiting in the main room, dressed in a new black suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Wilhelmina," he breathed, "you are beautiful." She blushed and ducked her head, pleased. "Thank you. You would look very handsome." They rode to town in the wagon, and Wilhelmina was surprised to see how many people had gathered at the church. There must have been 30 or 40 people milling about outside, bundled in their winter coats and best clothes. When she and Owen arrived, a cheer went up from the crowd. Mrs. Kaufman from the general store hurried over to greet them. "Oh, my dear, you look lovely," she exclaimed. "Come, let me help you with your things." The ceremony itself was simple but moving. Wilhelmina stood beside Owen in front of the altar, surrounded by the warm glow of candles and the friendly faces of strangers who were quickly becoming neighbors and friends. Reverend Patterson led them through the vows, and when it came time for Wilhelmina to say "I do," The words stuck in her throat for a long moment. Owen simply waited, his hand warm around hers, his eyes full of patient love. Finally, the words came. I do. When Owen kissed her to seal their union, it was gentle and sweet, a promise of tenderness to come. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration that followed took place in the church hall, where tables had been set up and loaded with food. There was music from a fiddle player and even some dancing. Wilhelmina found herself swept up in the joy of it all, meeting ranchers and their wives, railroad workers, shopkeepers, and even a doctor who had recently set up practice in town. One woman in particular sought her out. She was young, perhaps Wilhelmina's age, with bright red hair and a friendly smile. I am Sarah Mitchell, she said. My husband Tom and I have a ranch about 10 miles north of yours. I just wanted to say welcome to the valley, and if you ever need anything or just want some company, please come visit. Thank you, Wilhelmina said, touched by the offer. I would like that. As the afternoon wore on and the light began to fade, Owen found Wilhelmina and gently extracted her from a conversation with several ranch wives who were giving her advice on keeping a house in Wyoming winter. Ready to go home, Mrs. Vance? He asked, and the way he said her new name made her heart skip. Ah, yes, she said, smiling up at him. They said their goodbyes and rode home through the gathering twilight, the stars beginning to appear overhead. When they reached the ranch, Owen helped her down from the wagon, and then before she could move toward the house, he swept her up into his arms. It is tradition, he explained with a rare smile. I carry my bride over the threshold. Wilhelmina laughed, a sound that surprised her with its spontaneity, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Owen carried her into the house and set her down gently in front of the fire that Caleb had thoughtfully lit for them before heading to the bunkhouse to give them privacy. For a moment, they simply stood there, looking at each other in the firelight. Then Owen reached up and carefully began removing the pins from Wilhelmina's hair, letting the brown waves fall around her shoulders. His touch was reverent, as if she were something precious and fragile. I love you, he said quietly. I want you to know that. This is not just a practical arrangement for me. Not anymore. I love you, Wilhelmina. I love you too, she replied, the words coming easier now. You have given me S so much. S safety, and K kindness, and a H home. I never thought I would have any of this. You deserve all of it and more, Owen said. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her again, deeper this time, and Wilhelmina felt herself responding, all the fear and hesitation melting away in the warmth of his touch. That night, as they lay together in Owen's bed, now their bed, Wilhelmina felt truly safe for the first time in her life. Owen held her close, his body warm and solid beside her, and she knew that she had finally found the home she had always dreamed of. Winter settled over the ranch in earnest after their wedding. The snow piled up in drifts around the buildings, and the wind howled down from the mountains with a ferocity that initially frightened Wilhelmina. But the house was snug and warm, and Owen and Caleb had laid in plenty of supplies for both humans and animals. Wilhelmina discovered that she enjoyed the quiet intimacy of the winter months. With less work to be done outside, she and Owen had more time to simply be together. They read aloud to each other in the evenings, played card games, and talked about their hopes and dreams for the future. Owen proved to be an attentive and tender husband. He was patient with her shyness, never pushing her beyond what she was comfortable with, and she found herself blossoming under his care. Her stutter, while never completely gone, became less pronounced as the months passed. There were even whole conversations where she barely stumbled at all. In late December, as they prepared for Christmas, Wilhelmina realized something that made her both nervous and excited. She was carrying Owen's child. She had suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't been sure until she missed her second monthly cycle. The morning she was certain, she sat at the kitchen table trying to figure out how to tell him. Owen came in from the barn just as she was screwing up her courage. He took one look at her face and immediately crossed to her side. What is wrong? he asked, concern evident in his voice. Are you feeling sick? And no, Wilhelmina said quickly. Not sick, just nervous. About what? She took a deep breath and looked up at him. I am going to have a baby, she said, the words coming out in a rush. Our baby, in the summer, I think. For a moment, Owen just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow, wondering smile spread across his face, transforming it with joy. A baby, he repeated, as if he could not quite believe it. We are going to have a baby. Wilhelmina nodded, tears springing to her eyes at the happiness in his voice. Owen let out a whoop of joy that startled her, then carefully pulled her to her feet and into his arms. This is the best news I have ever had, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have made me the happiest man in Wyoming. They spent Christmas quietly, just the two of them and Caleb, but it was the best Christmas Wilhelmina could remember. Owen carved her a beautiful rocking chair for the baby, working on it in secret in the barn, and presented it to her on Christmas morning. She had knitted him a warm scarf and a pair of gloves, and his delight in the simple gifts made her heart swell. As winter gave way to spring, Wilhelmina's belly grew round with the baby. Owen became even more protective, barely letting her lift anything heavy and constantly asking if she was feeling well. It was both endearing and occasionally exasperating, but she knew it came from a place of deep love and care. In April, Sarah Mitchell came to visit, riding over despite the muddy roads. She brought news and gossip from around the valley and practical advice about childbirth that Wilhelmina found both helpful and terrifying. The two women had become friends over the winter, with Sarah visiting every few weeks, and Wilhelmina gradually becoming more comfortable in the other woman's presence. Do not let the stories scare you too much, Sarah said as they sat having tea. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. You will be fine, especially with Owen taking such good care of you. I am not as scared as I thought I would be, Wilhelmina admitted. I think because I feel safe here, with Owen. Sarah smiled knowingly. He is a good man, your Owen. Tom says he is one of the most honest men he has ever dealt with, and that is high praise for my husband. In June, when the wildflowers were blooming across the grasslands and the baby was due any time, Dr. Harrison from Medicine Bow rode out to the ranch to check on Wilhelmina. He pronounced her healthy and predicted the baby would come within the week. He was right. 3 days later, on a warm evening with the sun just setting, Wilhelmina's labor began. Owen sent Caleb riding hard for town to fetch the doctor and Sarah Mitchell, then did his best to keep Wilhelmina comfortable while they waited. He held her hand through the contractions, speaking to her in the same low, soothing voice he used with frightened horses, and somehow his calmness helped keep her own fear at bay. Dr. Harrison and Sarah arrived within an hour, and Sarah immediately took charge, shooing Owen out of the bedroom and helping Wilhelmina through the increasingly intense contractions. The labor lasted through the night, and Owen paced the main room like a caged animal, starting at every sound from the bedroom. Just as dawn was breaking, a new sound filled the house, the thin, strong cry of a newborn baby. Owen froze, his heart in his throat, waiting for someone to tell him what was happening. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, Sarah opened the bedroom door with a tired but happy smile. You have a son, she announced, and your wife did beautifully. Come and meet him. Owen practically ran into the room. Wilhelmina was propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. When she looked up at him, her eyes were shining with tears of joy. Owen, meet your son, she said, her voice hoarse but clear. Owen approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, scrunched-up face. His tiny hand waved in the air, and without thinking, Owen reached out and let the baby grasp his finger. The small hand wrapped around his finger with surprising strength, And Owen felt something shift in his chest, an expansion of love so intense it almost hurt. He is perfect, Owen whispered. You are perfect. Thank you, Wilhelmina. Thank you for this gift. They named him James after Owen's brother who had died in the war, and from the moment of his birth, he became the center of their world. Owen proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with the baby when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, and gazing at his son with an expression of such profound love that it made Wilhelmina's heart ache in the best possible way. As James grew from a tiny newborn to a chubby, smiling infant, Wilhelmina found herself growing too. Her stutter, which had improved steadily since her marriage, became less and less noticeable. There were still times when stress or strong emotion made the words catch, but most days she spoke with only the occasional stammer. Owen said he barely noticed it anymore, and she believed him. The ranch prospered as well. Owen's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and he found himself with more business than he could handle alone. He hired another hand, a young man named Pete, who had grown up in Medicine Bow and knew horses well. With the extra help, Owen was able to spend more time with his family, which suited him perfectly. When James was a year old, toddling around the house on unsteady legs and babbling in his own language, Wilhelmina discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a surprise, but no less joyful. Owen celebrated by building an addition onto the house, 2 more bedrooms so their growing family would have plenty of space. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, was born on a snowy February day in 1886. She had Wilhelmina's brown hair and Owen's gray eyes, and from the start, she was a determined little thing with a will of her own. James, now nearly 2, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost magical in its contentment. The years passed with the turning of the seasons, springs full of new foals and planting, summers of long days and warm nights, autumns of harvest and preparation, winters of cozy evenings by the fire with the children playing at their feet. Wilhelmina's stutter faded to the point where most people who met her never realized she had one. The fear that had ruled her for so many years became a distant memory, something that surfaced only occasionally in nightmares. When those nightmares came, Owen was always there, holding her until she remembered where she was and who she was with. In 1889, when James was 4 and Grace was 3, Wyoming became a state, and the whole valley celebrated. Owen took the family into Medicine Bow for the festivities, and Wilhelmina found herself standing in the street, watching the parade with her children in her arms and her husband at her side, marveling at how much her life had changed. She thought back to that terrified young woman who had stepped off the train in Cheyenne 6 years earlier, so afraid that her stutter would make her unlovable and unwanted. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, to this moment, to this life. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, noticing her reflective expression. Wilhelmina looked up at him, this good man who had given her everything, who had listened without rushing her, who had loved her not despite her brokenness but with it, understanding that the cracks were where the light got in. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," she said, and the words came out smooth and clear. "I am thinking about how you saved me, Owen." Owen shook his head, his expression serious but tender. "No, Wilhelmina. You saved yourself. You had the courage to get on that train and come out here looking for a better life. I just had the privilege of being here when you arrived." She smiled and stood on her toes to kiss him, right there in the middle of Main Street, with half the town watching and their children giggling at their parents' public affection. "We saved each other," she said, and knew it was the truth. Another baby came in 1890, a son they named Thomas, who had a sunny disposition from birth. And in 1892, their fourth and final child, another daughter they called Margaret, but who everyone called Maggie from the start. With 4 children, the ranch was always full of noise and activity, laughter and the occasional tears, and Wilhelmina loved every chaotic moment of it. She had become a respected member of the community, known for her kindness and her skill with healing herbs. Women from around the valley would come to her when their children were sick or when they needed advice. The girl who had been too afraid to speak had become someone other people sought out for her wisdom and compassion. Owen's horse business continued to thrive. He became known throughout Wyoming for his ability to train even the most difficult animals, and his stock was sought after by ranchers from Montana to Colorado. But no matter how busy the ranch became, he always made time for his family. Every evening, he would gather the children around and tell them stories, and every night, he would hold Wilhelmina close and tell her he loved her. In 1895, when their eldest, James, was approaching his 9th birthday, he asked his mother a question that caught her off guard. "Mama, why do you sometimes have trouble with your words?" he asked one afternoon as she was helping him with his schoolwork. The one-room schoolhouse had been built in Medicine Bow a few years earlier, and all the valley children attended when weather and ranch work permitted. Wilhelmina looked at her son, this bright, curious boy who was growing up so fast. She had known this question would come eventually, but she had not quite prepared herself for how to answer it. Well, she began, and even now, when caught off guard, the old stutter resurfaced slightly. When I was a little girl, some bad things happened to me. They made me very afraid, and that fear made it hard for me to speak. I got better over time, but sometimes the old habit comes back. James frowned, his young face serious. What kind of bad things? Owen, who had been mending tack at the table, spoke up. The kind of things that children should never have to experience, he said firmly. But your mama was very brave, and she survived. And then she came here and became part of our family. That is the important part. James nodded slowly, then reached out and took Wilhelmina's hand. I am glad you came here, Mama, he said. I am glad you are my mama. Wilhelmina's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, the kind that came from a heart so full of love it had to overflow somehow. I am glad too, sweetheart, she said. So very, very glad. That evening, after the children were all tucked into bed, Wilhelmina stood on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Owen came out and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then pulled her back against his chest, his arms encircling her. It has been a good life, has it not? He murmured into her hair. The best life, she agreed. Be better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you remember how nervous we both were that first night? Owen asked, a smile in his voice. When I picked you up from the train? I thought you would send me back, Wilhelmina admitted. I thought once you heard how badly I stuttered, you would change your mind about marrying me. I thought you would be disappointed in me, Owen confessed. I thought a woman from the city would take one look at this rough ranch and this rough cowboy and get right back on that train. They both laughed softly at their younger selves and their fears that had proven so unfounded. I am glad we were both wrong, Wilhelmina said. So am I, Owen replied. He turned her in his arms, so they were facing each other. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Wilhelmina Vance. You and those 4 beautiful children sleeping in there. You gave me a family, a real home. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again. You did the same for me, Wilhelmina said, reaching up to touch his face. You gave me my voice back, not just the ability to speak, but the confidence to use it. You made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth listening to. You always were, Owen said. I just helped you remember it. They stood there together as the stars came out, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together that was richer and fuller than either had dared to imagine. The ranch spread out around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Inside the house, their children slept safely. loved and cared for, and in each other's arms, they had found the home they had both been searching for all along. As they finally went inside for the night, Wilhelmina paused in the doorway and looked back at the land bathed in moonlight. She thought about the frightened girl who had arrived here 12 years ago, with nothing but a carpet bag and a desperate hope for something better. She thought about the patient cowboy who had given her the time and space to heal, who had listened to her halting words without rushing her, who had loved her into wholeness. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges, certainly. Winters would come and horses would need training and children would grow up and eventually leave to start families of their own. But through it all, they would have each other, and that was more than enough. Wilhelmina Vance, formerly Edwards, who had once been too afraid to speak, now had a voice that was heard and valued. She had a husband who cherished her, children who loved her, a community that respected her, and a home that was truly hers. The stutter that had once defined her was now just a small part of her story, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. As she slipped into bed beside Owen that night, feeling his warmth and his steady breathing beside her, she whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." The words came out clear and strong, without a single stumble. Thank you to the universe, to fate, to whatever had brought her to this place and this man. Thank you for second chances and new beginnings. Thank you for teaching her that broken things could heal and that love, real love, was patient enough to wait for the words to come. Owen's arm tightened around her, and she knew he had heard. She knew he understood, just as he always had, just as he always would. And wrapped in his embrace, surrounded by the life they had built together, Wilhelmina finally fell asleep with a smile on her face and peace in her heart, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged. The years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm. By 1900, James was 14 and already as tall as his father, helping full-time with the ranch work. Grace was 12, a bright girl with a talent for drawing, who filled notebooks with sketches of horses and landscapes. Thomas, now 10, had inherited his mother's gentle way with frightened animals, and Maggie, at 8, was the family's resident storyteller, always spinning tales that kept her siblings entertained on long winter evenings. The ranch had expanded over the years. Owen had purchased adjacent land when the opportunity arose, and they now ran cattle alongside the horse breeding operation. Caleb had retired to a small house in town, but Pete had stayed on and was now the foreman, with several other hands working under him. The original small house had been expanded twice, and while it was not fancy, it was comfortable and filled with love. Wilhelmina had become known throughout the region, not just for her herbal remedies, but for her way with people who struggled with their own demons. More than once, a woman who was being mistreated by a husband or father had shown up at the ranch seeking refuge, and Wilhelmina had never once turned anyone away. She and Owen had helped several women escape bad situations and start new lives, sometimes in Medicine Bow, sometimes farther away. It was their way of paying forward the second chance that had been given to them. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Wilhelmina with a trip. He arranged for Pete to watch the ranch and the children, and he took her on the train to Denver for a week. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together since their honeymoon, which had consisted of one night in a hotel in Medicine Bow. In Denver, they stayed in a real hotel with running water and electric lights, marvels that amazed them both. They went to restaurants and the theater. They walked through parks and visited museums. But Wilhelmina's favorite part was simply being alone with Owen, rediscovering each other away from the demands of ranch life and parenthood. On their last night in the city, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room looking out over the lights of Denver, Owen pulled a small box from his pocket. "I never gave you a proper wedding gift," he said. "I would like to rectify that now." Inside the box was a delicate gold locket. Owen opened it to reveal two tiny photographs, one of Wilhelmina, one of himself, taken during this trip. "So you can always keep me close to your heart," he said, "the way you have always been close to mine." Wilhelmina felt the familiar sting of tears, but they were happy tears, as so many of her tears had been these past 15 years. "It is be beautiful," she said, and even now, after all this time, strong emotion still brought the slight stutter back. But it did not bother her anymore. It was just part of who she was, like her brown hair or her love of horses. "Help me put it on." Owen fastened the locket around her neck, and she touched it gently, feeling the warmth of the metal against her skin. "I love you," she said, turning to face him. "More in now than even on the day we am married. Thank you for this life, Owen. For everything. The thanks are all mine," Owen replied, pulling her close. "You took a chance on a broken-down cowboy with bad dreams and a limp. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to build something that would last. I love you, Wilhelmina, more than words can ever express." They kissed there on the balcony, two middle-aged people who had weathered storms together and come through stronger, two hearts that beat as one, two souls that had found their home in each other. When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted by four excited children and a pile of stories about everything that had happened while they were gone. That night, as the family sat around the dinner table laughing and talking over each other, Wilhelmina looked around at the faces she loved most in the world and felt a contentment so deep it was almost spiritual. This was what she had been searching for that day she stepped off the train in Cheyenne. Not just safety, not just a home, but a place where she belonged, where she was valued, where her voice mattered even when the words came slowly. She had found it in the arms of a patient cowboy who had taught her that love did not rush, that healing took time, and that the broken places were often where the strongest bonds formed. As the 20th century dawned and the old Wild West gave way to a more settled existence, Owen and Wilhelmina Vance remained constants in the Medicine Bow Valley, steady, kind, hardworking people who had built a good life through patience and love. Their children grew into fine young adults who carried forward the lessons they had learned, that kindness mattered, that everyone deserved to be heard, and that family was not just who you were born to, but who you chose to stand beside. James eventually took over the horse operation, expanding it even further and becoming known throughout Wyoming and beyond for his skill. Grace married the doctor's son and moved to Laramie, where she taught art at the university. Thomas stayed at the ranch, running the cattle operation and eventually buying land of his own nearby. And Maggie became a teacher in Medicine Bow, inspiring a generation of children with her stories and her compassion. Owen and Wilhelmina became grandparents many times over, and their house once again filled with the sounds of young voices, though these were their grandchildren now, visiting on weekends and holidays. They still rode together on warm evenings, still sat by the fire reading to each other, still held hands across the dinner table after decades of marriage. Wilhelmina's stutter never completely disappeared, but it had faded to such a slight thing that new acquaintances often never noticed it at all. More importantly, she no longer feared it. It was simply part of her story, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. She spoke up at town meetings. She gave advice freely. She told stories to her grandchildren without self-consciousness. The fear that had once silenced her was long gone, replaced by the confidence that came from being truly loved and valued. On a spring evening in 1915, when they were both in their 50s and had been married for nearly 30 years, Owen and Wilhelmina sat on the porch watching the sunset as they had done countless times before. The ranch was quieter now, with the children grown and gone, but it was still home, still the center of their world. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Wilhelmina asked, her hand in Owen's. "If I had been too afraid to answer your advertisement, if you had chosen someone else—" "I try not to," Owen admitted. "The thought of missing out on this life, on you and our children and everything we have built, it is too painful to contemplate." "I was so scared," Wilhelmina remembered. "When I got off that train, I was certain you would send me away." "I was scared too," Owen said. "I thought maybe I had made a mistake. advertising for a bride. I thought maybe I was not capable of being a good husband after everything I had been through. But then I saw you standing there, looking so brave, even though I could see you were terrified. And I knew you were going to change my life. We changed each other's lives, Wilhelmina corrected gently. She no longer stumbled over her words when she was relaxed and happy, and there on the porch with the man she loved. She was both. We healed together. Yes, Owen agreed. We did. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance, the land they had worked and loved spreading out around them. Somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied. From the bunkhouse came the sound of Pete playing his harmonica. The creek that ran through the property babbled its endless song. I would not change a single thing, Wilhelmina said finally. Not the hard times, not the struggles, not even the fear that brought me here. Because it all led to this, to you, to the life we have made. And it has been a beautiful life, Owen. The most beautiful life. It has, Owen agreed, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. And it is not over yet. We have many good years ahead of us still. He was right. They did have more good years, years of watching their grandchildren grow, years of continuing to build and improve the ranch, years of growing old together with grace and love. But even in that moment, sitting on the porch in the twilight, they both knew that whatever time they had left would be enough because they had each other. The mail order bride, who had stuttered from years of fear, had found her voice and her home. The cowboy, who had been broken by war, had found his peace and his purpose. Together, they had created something lasting and beautiful, a family, a legacy, and a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. And through it all, Owen never rushed her, never showed impatience, never made her feel less than whole. He had given her the greatest gift anyone could give another person, the gift of time, the gift of patience, the gift of being truly seen and accepted. In return, she had given him a reason to heal, a home to cherish, and a love that lasted a lifetime. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Wilhelmina leaned her head against Owen's shoulder and whispered the words that had become her truth, her reality, her greatest joy. I am home. And she was, finally, completely, eternally home.